Here we have our good place to start computer with the G1 Gaming 980 Ti from Gigabyte in. If we look at the user bench results, you see for gaming we get a UFO, which is basically saying if it's excellent PC for gaming. The only thing they're complaining about, we've tested the one with the hybrid drive, not with the SSD, but other than that overall scores are excellent. If we scroll down, we can see here the CPU got in the 65th percentile, which again is above average, which is excellent. The graphics card we've actually got in the 80th percentile, which is very, very good, and this is for 980 Ti's, which basically says it's one of the better ones. But as we know, there are some higher models. The solid state hybrid drive also fared fairly well, and the RAM fared excellently. Now if we move on to 3D Mark, we've got a score of 14,360, which is an excellent score. As you can see here, with this kind of graphics card, we could see the physics score as the lowest part, which is CPU bound. So this is the point where you might start to really see some value by rather going for something like the 600-700K and even maybe overclocking it a bit. But we will do a few tests with that later on and demonstrate it as well. If we look at the online compared score, you can see it's better than 90% of computers, so this is really a serious gaming PC already as it is, and at the price we feel it's excellent value for money, and you really can do everything from serious 2K gaming into most games on 4K, which we'll demonstrate in the rest of this video. Here we have Dota running at 4K, and interestingly enough, on the 980 Ti, we seem to be getting the exact same frame rates as on 2K, so which is very high, 117, 116, which basically says there seems to be something else limiting us to frame rates in that sort of area, but we're not graphics cards limited, and the same thing when we get creeps, we drop down to about 114. But more than you'd possibly need for playing Dota. Okay, and here we have Counter-Strike Go at 4K, still running 150 frames per second, 148 frames per second, so not an issue with everything turned up to the maximum here. Yeah, lowest there is 142, so still very good frame rates. Here we have Civilizations 5 running at 4K. We're seeing a nice, comfortable 130 frames per second with this 980 Ti. Drops down a little bit with movement to 129, but it's still way above what you would in practice need for any kind of a strategy game. Yes, we're seeing very, very nice frame rates, and this is at 4K. Here we have Call of Duty 5 World at War. It's Nazi zombies running at 4K. We got a nice 91 frames per second, which is for the 980 Ti is not surprising, as we saw the same thing on the 970. This engine seems to be limited at the 91 frames per second, so not a problem to run something like this at all. Here we have Skyrim running at 4K, some nice smoke effects and distance drawing in the scene here. We are still completely stuck at 60 frames per second, as we'd expect to be. So this is not a challenge at all to run this game at 4K with maximum settings. Here we have Borderlands the pre-sequel running at 4K with everything set to maximum. Let's see what happens when we get some action here. We're sitting at 80 frames per second, 79, 77, so overall very good frame rates for 4K gaming. Drop down, the lowest I saw there was about 67, but definitely more than playable at 4K with the 980 Ti. Here we have Project Cars running at 4K. This is on our good place to start platform, the 980 Ti, remember. So what's very significant about this specific game, it's actually one of the only DirectX 12 games. For DirectX 12, the CPU has a larger effect than most other games, And the nice thing is we're seeing 90 frames per second, 86 frames per second, and I do things a little silly, 85 frames per second, but given that this is considered one of the serious graphics, the graphics intensive games, we can get this result at 4K. Really says a lot about the platform and about this graphics card. The lowest we were able to get to there was about 82 frames per second, which is excellent for running something like this at 4K. Here's Battlefield 4 running at 4K. This is probably one of the most challenging games for 4K, but we're seeing a nice smooth 65 frames per second, drops down occasionally to 63. But it's nice, and really actually very nice and impressive with this 980 Ti. We do see if we run through some foliage, we're dropping down to 52, 53, 52 frames per second. So this is down 51, 48. 48 was the lowest we saw there. 53. So let's see what happens. Here's 48. We get a intense scene and we introduce some particle physics into it. And it drops down to 48, so that's perfectly reasonable and really not bad at all. 56, 61. So it's playable at maximum on 4K. And this is everything set to ultra, but you are sort of on the borderline with this one. If you're the reason why we normally don't classify this ultra one for 4K, this specific card, is because it's a bit borderline. You do drop below the 60 frames per second with this card. Here we have Fractured Space running at 4K. As you can see, it's incredibly smooth on this 980 Ti. It is really a dream to play with this card. We're sort of just at the edge though, so we're sitting at 60 frames per second here, 54 frames, 53 frames with the extra physics there. If we introduce a bit more, yeah, sort of staying high 50 frames per second, about 57. Effects in this game is excellent. With the explosions there, we drop down to 50 and immediately back up a bit again. But overall, not a problem with 4K, and this is with everything set to absolute maximum.